Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to discuss whether we should be buying a new lens or a used lens. So for you today I have a Sigma 170-500mm or a used Canon 100-400 L Series, which is obviously the top of the range for Canon, image stabilizer ultrasonic lens. So do you buy a second hand one of this, or you buy a new one of these? Because the price of this new is the same price roughly as this used. Bearing in mind that this is a £2,000 lens, and this, when this came out, was a £600 lens. So, but after I go through this with you and show you some images, I know what I did and I know what I think you should do. Obviously the Sigma is a 170-500mm lens. Its ratio is 1.5 and its wide open f-stop is 6.3. So you need quite a good light for you to start using this lens on the day. The only thing that I used on it was a speed booster, so that did bring the f-stop down a little bit, but it still required, pretty good sunlight for it to work pretty good. Obviously with the focusing side, the minimum distance at 170 is 3 metre, and then at 500, obviously it's fully extended out, is 3.2 metre, so it's like 10.5 foot. So that's the basic. Now there is a switch only for manual or autofocus on this particular model, which is obviously the APODG, and it's got obviously a locking mechanism there for the tripod, a tripod ring. This operates the same as the Canon, yeah. It's a slide zoom, yeah. So, but what I've noticed is obviously, not that you're going to do that with the camera, but if you're on a tripod and you're pointing upwards a bit, you can get some tracking. But if you zoom out and you hold it up, it just slows, it just goes back down again. I mean, it's not a major concern, because obviously most of the time it's on a level field. You're not going to be pointing it so it does. But it can slowly hunt a little bit, I suppose. But with the Canon, it doesn't do that. So technically, it's got a good range on it. Obviously 500mm. You put a converter on it and you get 1000mm. So you can double the reach on that. Weight wise, it's not too bad, but like I say, when you're using a big telephoto lens like this, whether it's Sigma or Canon, well, I would prefer to put it on a tripod anyway, especially with this one, because there is no image stabilization on this one. So being on a tripod at full length, full extended, is probably a good idea, definitely. So that's the looks of that bit. Now with the Canon, it's the same. It's got the focus ring. It's got the tripod ring, but there is quite a lot of differences. Weight wise, yeah, it's a little bit heavier, but compared to that, you do the same. You hold it straight up, yes, it will come down. But with the Canon, you can lock it. So whatever millimeter you want to, so you can go to say 250, and you can tighten it and it locks and it won't move, yeah? And then you just open the ring, you move it, so get to the where you want it to be, tighten it up, and it won't move, it will stay, it stays constantly. Also in autofocus mode, you can still manually tweak it as well. So if you get to a point where you're on spot focus, what I found, and you're trying to focus on something quite a distance away, sometimes your focus will hunt a little bit because of the background. It might be too bright or whatever. So you can just tweak it a little bit on the focusing ring manually while it's in autofocus, and it'll soon pick it up. Very rarely happens, but it does happen. So, but you can just tweak that bit. So as far as the technical bit goes on it, this has got a two-stage stabiliser. You've got a mode 1 and 2, and you've got an on and off for that. You have the same autofocus and manual focus, but you have a switch here that you can, when you're doing something close up at 1.8 meters, you have a switch where you have it on 1.8, and then when you go to infinity, you just flick a switch and it'll focus to infinity and still keep in focus with everything that you go. So that's a good thing, and obviously it's Canon's flagship lens. So there is a lot of differences between this and that, and it's not just in the, you know, the spec. Not to say that the Sigma isn't a good lens. It is a good lens. I have had some really good pictures from it. But when you're shooting, I tend to find I have more keepers with this one than I do with that one. Now, whether it's, I don't think it's, when it's on autofocus and I'm on the spot focusing and tracking, you know, a bird or whatever, it's not as fast as this. This is really super fast. Not just in tracking, but in focusing. You know, as soon as you touch your focus button, it's zap straight on it. This one takes a little bit longer. But there again, if you've got a really good, nice day, then it does speed up a little bit. So it is good. I'm not going to put it down too much because it is a budget lens. You know, this is a professional lens that's, you know, one of the best out there. This is more affordable. But you will find that the using this, what it has to offer in a lens, you know, isn't really as good as this, but it does take good photos. You know, I can't complain at the quality of the photos. But we'll get to that, and I'll show you some photos later. Okay, so spec-wise on this Sigma, I'll have to read because I can't remember all the, I'm an old guy, you must forgive me. We'll go with the Sigma first, okay? So, the model is a Sigma, 170 by 500 millimeter, APO, f5 6.3 DG. Its image circle is 35 millimeter. The type of lens is a telephoto zoom lens. Its APS equivalent is 1.5 times crop of 255 and at 750 millimeter, and 16 times at 272, 800 millimeters. I'm not quite sure what that means, but hey ho. As I said before, the maximum aperture on this is f5 or 6.3, depending on the sun out there, and the minimum aperture is f-stop 32, which is probably standard, you know, for pretty much most lenses. The diaphragm blades inside the lens is 9, and the lens construction is 13 elements in 11 groups. and that's including 1 spherical and 3 SLD elements. The focus details are internal, front element rotational, no. The zoom is rotary. The closest focusing distance is 300 centimeters. The magnification ratio is 0.15 crop. Filter size, quite a big filter actually. I'll just take that off. It's 86 millimeter, so it's quite a big filter. Filter wise, you know, that's totally up to yourselves. Even if you just buy a filter just to protect the actual lens, I would say that on any, any telephoto lens or any, decent quality lens, always protect your glass. And if it means putting a filter on just to do that, I would. It protects the glass, so it's a good idea. But yeah, it's an 86 millimeter lens filter. Weight wise, it says it's through 1345 grams. So it's not bad, and it is available for Canon, Nikon, Minolta and Pentax. So you can get the AF mounts suitable for that, for those cameras. And it's round, like I say, it's around about 650 quid now, I think, 600 quid, brand new. So it's not an expensive lens, but it's not a cheap lens. So that's your specifications on the Sigma lens. Okay, next up is the Canon lens. So like I say there again, I can't remember all the specs off the top of my head, so I'll have to read you a bit after the computer. So obviously it's a Canon lens. That's obviously a telephoto. The mount's obviously EF lens for Canon. The maximum aperture, so obviously the widest open, is 4.5. The lens type obviously is a telezoom. It's intended for a 35mm SLR, digital SLR. The focal length is 100 to 400, as we've said. Optical zoom is 4 times. Magnification is 0.02. The minimum focusing distance, as I said before with this, when I discussed the switch, is 1.8 meters. And the zoom adjustment is manual. So obviously, in and out, that's manual, yeah. Now the lens construction obviously is a bit more superior to this one. The lens construction has got 14 groups with 17 elements. So compared to this one, it's a little bit different, isn't it? Filter size is 77mm. It's always good to put a filter over to protect your lens. That's always a good idea. And it's got lens coating on it anyway, but it's a super spectra coating on the lens itself. But like I said, you can't beat putting a filter on just to make sure you don't scratch it, really. I mean, I always tend to put my lens cover on it anyway, so if I do bang it, I'd rather damage this than damage the lens. So that's where it is. So that's the technical side out of the way. I only got this a couple of months ago. I think it was a couple of months ago. And obviously I've had this one for quite some time. And I have to say, I did drop it. And it was in the conservatory on the tile floor, and it's like, oh my God. I didn't hear anything smash. So even though it dropped on the corner. I don't know if you can see that. Well, you probably can't, it's that small. But it did put a little crack right on the end. But it hasn't affected the image quality or anything. It still works fine. So But the only reason why I changed for the Canon one is obviously it's a far superior lens, and I've started doing wildlife photography now a little bit more seriously, and obviously that is nowhere near as fast as the Canon. So I can still use this, you know, for macro work. It's a great macro lens. You know, when I put a converter on, I've got some extension tubes, and it works actually very good as a macro lens. You know, if you're doing something like dragonflies or butterflies, you know, as soon as you get close, they fly off. So the benefit of having that as a 170 to 500 zoom and put macro tubes on, you know, I can be at quite a distance away and get very close up. I did a dragonfly photo earlier on this year. I think I put it on one of my other videos, and I took the dragonfly with this lens. The only thing that was missing really on the video side of it was it didn't have image stabilization. So I had to try and crop that out a little bit because it did, you know, move. I mean, obviously the bush was moving as well, so it was difficult. But with a Canon, I don't get that because I've got the image stabilization 1 and 2. So the majority of the movement, you know, I can get rid of it on the lens, nearly completely disappeared, and then obviously it doesn't take much in post. So that's another reason, really. There's lots of reasons, you know. It's, you know, for why we choose lenses to do a job. You know, even though the focal length 500mm and this is 400mm, I can still put the converter on for my Canon lens, and it makes it from 400 to 800. I don't really need to get anywhere any more than that. Obviously, the further you are away and the light that you get sometimes, you know, putting a converter on isn't always the best option. All right, you might get closer, but you can't get the speed you need. I've worked it out. Like I say, I am new to this stuff, especially the Canon one, and I found out that it's not necessarily the light. The light's important, but if you've got a little bit of low light, then the speed, you know, your shutter speed is as important as your light. So you've got to try and balance that out. I don't like using ISO more than 800 if I can get away with it with my D1, because it starts to look grainy. But if I can get it to, you know, 800 and get the speed up and you know, mess about in between, then I'm going to get the results that I'm looking for. But that, everybody's different, everybody uses a lens different, everybody focuses different. But for me, I'm learning now it's not just about, you know, the aperture. It's all these three things have to come together. So you know, your aperture, your ISO, and your frame rate. So you've got to try and balance it out and not have too much ISO, because obviously your picture's going to be grainy. If you're too slow, you know, you're going to end up with blurry pictures and they're not pin sharp. And if your aperture's so wide open, you know, to its wide open spot, you're going to get soft pictures. So your bokeh is going to be quite soft. I took a picture yesterday, I think it was. Was it yesterday? Yeah, I went for a walk yesterday, and I got a picture of a robin, and the light was terrible. But anyway, I battled on with it. But I took this with the aperture, I think, at 5.6, because I couldn't get the speed. Anyway, I took the picture, and the actual object, well, the robin, is quite pin sharp, but the surroundings is so soft and out of focus, if you will. It makes it's a nice effect, but obviously not everybody likes that. But I just wish it would have been a little bit lighter. I could have used a bit of a faster shutter speed, which would have given me probably a little bit sharper picture. Grain isn't a problem on this. Like I say, it was 800, I think. The grain wasn't. Well, it's not a problem. I even printed the picture out, and it's pretty good. So it's just a fine balance. So I'm waffling a bit now. I think at the end of the day, you need to know a certain amount of spec on what you're buying and what you're going to use the lens for. So I feel I've took the next step up from this kind of stuff to the best. Now, I'm not saying that the Sigma isn't a good lens. The Sigma is a very good lens. But I just feel now I've been using the Canon for a bit, I am starting to notice things that are better. A lot of things that are better. It is faster, it is this, it is that, it is the other. But the main reason for me doing this, it isn't about which is the best lens. We know which is the best lens out of the two. It's about money. Now, camera gear is expensive, and when you start doing YouTube stuff like this, you need a video camera. If you're lucky enough that you can have 2 or 3, you can afford that, that's fine. But for most of us, we can only have 2 cameras max. Well, you don't need any more than 2 cameras. One for videoing and one for taking pictures. That's how I see it. I can take pictures on this camera that I'm using now for videoing. It's great. It's much simpler to use than my D1. But I like using my D1 because you've got to adjust everything. You've got to compose the picture, set the white balance. You've got to choose the right focusing mode, choose the right ISO, f-stop, speed. It's all the fun about photography. Now with these new ones, you have got this live view, which live view is amazing. It's a really good option to have on a camera, and I wish my D1 had it, but it hasn't. But I'm only saying that because of my eyesight. My eyesight obviously isn't as good as what it used to be, so it's nice and easy to look at a screen to see where you're at. But I still enjoy, as I call it, the traditional way of taking a photograph. But like I say, it's all down to money. Cut the crap. It's all down to money. Now, would I buy a new one of this, which I did years ago, because I couldn't afford anything else, or do I buy a used one? The simple answer is buy a used one, because you can get this second hand for the same price as a new one. So it's a no-brainer. Obviously you've got to be careful. I bought that off eBay, and I did a lot of research, and I could see ones that were going for like £400-500, but they were, they had marks on them, they had maybe some dust in them, and blah blah blah, and fungus, which you don't want, because obviously, you can buy it relatively cheap enough, but you send it off, and you'll spend another £100 or so getting it all serviced and getting it all sorted out. But if you just spend a little bit more, up to the price of one of them, you're far better off. I would certainly, look at buying another lens like this, the quality like this, second hand. No question. Because you will benefit. It's alright having a brand new lens and it'll do what you want it to do. But when you start getting to the next level, you're talking thousands of pounds for lenses. The 400 version of that, the 400 straight fixed focal, the up-to-date one is not 5. I think I saw it advertised on Canon website for about £10,000. I mean, that's daft money, isn't it? Unless you're a professional photographer and you're doing that for a living, then fair enough. You can justify it. But if you're a hobby photographer like me, an amateur like me, then obviously you've got to look at other options and to justify spending the money. But now I'm used to it and getting used to it with my 1D that I bought. The two put together, it's a fantastic marriage. That lens works so well with the 1D. It's amazing. And the more I'm using it, the more I get used to it, and obviously the better quality pictures that I'll achieve, which I won't be able to with that because it's not fast enough. It doesn't feel right, to be fair. Never has done. But it does take good photos. So, all that said, the real truth is in the image quality. I took some pictures of the moon, which was the easiest really to show you. Some with the Sigma and some with the Canon. So you can see. So whatever your thoughts or whatever you think, that's totally up to you. I know what the results are. I know how good the Canon was, and the Sigma was good as well. But you can see and make your own mind up. But like I said, the decision is: would you buy a new one, or would you buy a second-hand one for the same price, a better standard of lens? And I've said it before, it's a no-brainer. Opt for the better lens, definitely. Okay, starting with the Canon lens. This obviously is squirrel. This was at 400mm with spot focus, f5.6, and it was 1 to 1/60th of a second. And by the way, this was handheld. Obviously, next up the moon. Same with the Canon lens again. It was 400mm. F-stop was 8, and the time was 1/100th of a second. Obviously, this was tripod with image stabilization on, and I think that was pretty crisp. Okay, next on to the Dragonfly with the Sigma lens. This focal length was 710. The f-stop was 14, and the time was 1/160th of a second. Now obviously it would have been nice to be a bit faster. I could have got it a bit sharper, but hey ho, it still come out a pretty crisp picture. Okay, on to the moon with the Sigma. This was set at 500mm. It was f9, and the shutter speed was 1/50th of a second. Now, to me, I don't think that is anywhere as sharp as the Canon lens. Don't know what you think, but that's what I think. And there we go, we'll just finish off with my little robin. I think that's a beautiful photograph, and that's obviously taken with my Canon lens.